It was a quiet spring morning in 1985 when everything changed forever. The Johnson family, Michael, his wife Denise, and their 2 young children, were just your average loving family living in a modest house on the edge of town. Nothing about them stood out too much. They kept to themselves, went to church on Sundays, and waved politely to neighbors. But one morning, their house sat eerily still. No one came out to mow the lawn. No lights turned on the night before. And the front door, usually locked tight, was swinging open. A neighbor, concerned by the silence, walked over to check on them. Inside, the house was completely silent. Not a single voice, not a single sound. The family's car was still in the driveway. Their clothes were hanging in the closets. Breakfast dishes were still on the table, as if someone had just gotten up to get something and never came back. The strangest part, there were no signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle, nothing broken. It was as if the family had just vanished into thin air. Police arrived quickly and began their search. They scoured the house inch by inch, interviewed neighbors, and even brought in dogs to sniff out any clues, but there were no tracks, no notes, no cries for help. Just silence. As hours turned into days and days into weeks, rumors began to spread. Some whispered that the Johnsons had been taken. Others believed they ran away from something dark, but no one knew for sure. The case soon turned cold. No new leads, no tips, no sightings. The once busy family home sat empty and forgotten, collecting dust as the years passed. To the outside world, it looked like a family simply disappeared, without a single goodbye, without a trace. But what no one knew was that they never even left the house. When police first stepped into the Johnson family home, they expected answers. What they found instead was an even deeper mystery. There were no broken windows, no overturned furniture, not even a single drop of blood. Everything inside the house looked untouched, like time had frozen the moment the family vanished. The beds were made. Denise's purse sat on the kitchen counter, untouched. The children's school books were neatly stacked by the front door. Michael's favorite coat still hung on the hook by the entrance. It was like they had been planning to come back any minute. But they never did. Investigators questioned everyone on the street, neighbors, teachers, friends. No one had seen anything strange. No loud arguments, no late-night visitors, no suspicious cars, just silence. Everyone remembered the Johnsons as kind, quiet people who never caused trouble, and yet they were gone. Police tried every theory. Maybe they left voluntarily, maybe it was a kidnapping, maybe someone close to them had snapped. But without any evidence, they couldn't prove a thing. No fingerprints, no signs of forced entry, no ransom note, nothing. The media caught wind of the case, and soon the Johnsons' faces were everywhere, on flyers, news reports, and talk shows. People all over the state were asked to come forward with tips. A few false leads trickled in. Someone thought they saw the kids at a gas station. Another claimed to hear a scream near the woods, but none of them checked out. Detectives even brought in psychics. One claimed the family was trapped underground. Another said they were being watched. It all sounded like wild guesses. Weeks passed, then months, and finally years. Slowly the case slipped away, files were closed, detectives moved on, the Johnson home was sold, new families came and went. But behind closed doors, the unanswered question still hung in the air. How could an entire family vanish without a single clue? What no one realized was this. Sometimes the scariest secrets aren't hidden far away. Sometimes they're buried right beneath your feet. At first, the neighborhood buzzed with concern. The Johnsons weren't just another family, they were part of the heartbeat of the street. Denise often baked cookies for the block's children. Michael helped shovel snow from driveways in the winter and fixed a few squeaky gates when no one else had time. Their 2 children, Maya and Caleb, were often seen riding bikes or chasing fireflies at dusk. So when they vanished, it was as if someone had snatched a piece of the community itself. In the first few weeks, the neighbours left food by the doorstep, hoping maybe the Johnsons would return and find their way back to normal life. Notes were taped to the front door. "We miss you. Please let us know you're okay." Children whispered among themselves, afraid to even walk past the now silent house. Parents tried to comfort them, but they were unnerved too. As the months passed, worry turned into quiet dread. The porch light was never turned on again. Weeds crawled up through the cracks in the driveway. The once cheerful yellow curtains faded in the sun. Slowly, the Johnson house became a ghost of what it once was, a shadow standing at the corner of the street. No one wanted to admit it, but fear had taken root. Some believed something dark had happened inside those walls. A few thought it was haunted, cursed even. At night, lights were seen flickering inside, only to disappear seconds later. The house began to breathe rumors. Every birthday the Johnson children missed was a painful reminder. Every Christmas, neighbours put an extra candle in their windows in silent prayer. And yet, no answers came. A couple who moved in nearby tried asking about the house's history. One old man said, "We don't talk about that house anymore. It's better to leave the past buried." But for the families who had watched the Johnson kids grow up, silence was never an option. One woman, Mrs. Lynette, walked past the house every morning for years, whispering a prayer under her breath as she passed. "Lord," she would say, "just show us what happened." Just one sign. 9 years passed. Children grew up. Neighbours moved away. The world moved on. But that house, it never changed. Still, still, still. The Johnsons had become a story, a whispered name at dinner tables, a warning to newcomers, a mystery that never quite faded even when people stopped saying it out loud. But hidden in the shadows of that quiet street, behind the hollow walls of that house, a terrible truth remained. They were still there, waiting, hoping, forgotten. And when the truth finally surfaced, no one could have imagined just how close the Johnsons had always been. 9 years after the Johnsons vanished, their old home was nothing more than a quiet structure with peeling paint and stories no one dared to repeat. Most people avoided the property. But in the summer of 1994, a man named Charles and his wife Diane bought the house at a bargain price, unaware of the rumors that still clung to its walls like dust. At first, everything seemed normal. The couple moved in with big plans, fresh paint, new flooring, maybe even a nursery. But within days, strange things began to happen. It started with the sounds. Late at night, Charles would hear faint tapping, almost like footsteps, coming from inside the walls. Diane brushed it off as old pipes settling or raccoons in the attic. But Charles wasn't so sure. One night, while reading in the living room, he heard it again, 3 soft thumps, then silence. When he pressed his ear to the wall, he could have sworn he heard breathing. Then came the hidden things. While fixing up a room in the basement, Charles noticed something odd. The wall didn't sound right. He knocked on one side, it echoed. He knocked the other, it was solid. Curious, he began measuring. That's when he realized part of the wall was thicker than it should have been. With a crowbar in hand, he began to pry. Behind an old shelf was a panel that didn't match the rest of the woodwork. He tapped it, and it moved. Hinges, hidden hinges. He stared at it, heart pounding, unsure whether to call someone or open it himself. He opened it. What he found was a narrow passageway, dark and cold, leading deeper into the house's foundation. He called Diane over. Flashlights in hand, they stepped inside. The air was stale. The walls were lined with makeshift shelves, old blankets, and what looked like empty food cans. a faint smell of mildew, and something else, something human, hung in the air. And then they heard it. A cough, faint, from deeper in the darkness. Charles froze. Diane gasped. This was no empty crawl space. Someone, or something, had been here. Recently. They turned a corner, and there it was. Another hatch, this one bolted from the outside, and behind it, muffled voices. The Johnsons hadn't left. They had been hidden, trapped, for 9 long years. Charles didn't wait. With trembling hands, he removed the bolts on the second hatch. Each turn of the wrench echoed like thunder in the tight, airless passage. Diane stood behind him, clutching the flashlight, her breath shallow, her mind racing with impossible questions. And then click. The final bolt came loose. The hatch creaked open slowly, its hinges rusted but intact. As the door swung inward, a rush of air hit them, thick, stale and heavy with years of silence. What they saw stopped them cold. It was a room, hidden deep beneath the house. A space that no floor plan had ever shown. It was narrow and windowless, its concrete walls closing in like a tomb. Faint light from their flashlight revealed tattered blankets in the corners, plastic containers filled with stale food, and the unmistakable signs of human life. On the far side of the room sat a woman, thin, pale, and shaking. Her eyes squinted at the light as if she hadn't seen it in years. Behind her, a man stirred slowly, shielding 2 children who were barely recognizable as kids anymore. Their hair was long and tangled, their clothes hung loose on their frail frames. But it was them. It was the Johnson family. Diane gasped and dropped the flashlight, its beams spinning wildly across the walls before settling. Charles froze, heart pounding as the impossible became real. They hadn't run away, they hadn't vanished. They had been here, beneath everyone's feet, for nearly a decade. The secret room had been expertly built into the home's foundation, sealed behind layers of false walls and paneling. Whoever created it had known exactly what they were doing. There were no windows, no way out, no sounds that could escape. It was a prison, quiet, invisible, and cruel. The Johnsons had survived, but barely. Denise Johnson, her voice weak and cracking, whispered only 2 words, "Please help." In that moment, Charles and Diane understood the full horror of what had happened. This wasn't a ghost story, it wasn't just a mystery, it was a crime, hidden in plain sight, wrapped in drywall and silence, undetected by police, neighbors, and even time. Charles called 911 immediately. As help arrived, the family was gently brought out into the light, trembling, blinking, holding one another like they might disappear again. For the first time in 9 years, they were free. But as the world learned about the hidden room beneath the house, one terrifying question remained. Who built it? And why? The world was stunned by the Johnson family's reappearance. But no one could have imagined the nightmare they had endured beneath that house. The hidden chamber was no more than a glorified crawl space. Just 7 feet wide and barely tall enough to stand in, the walls were rough concrete, stained with years of dampness. There were no windows, no light. Day and night melted into one endless stretch of darkness, broken only by the flicker of a battery-powered lantern that often ran out of power. Inside, there was no bed, just layers of old blankets and flattened cardboard boxes that had served as makeshift mattresses. In one corner, a rusted bucket sat beneath a cracked pipe, dripping water, filthy, but it had kept them alive. The small shelf of canned goods had long since run dry, forcing them to ration mouldy crackers, powdered milk, and whatever the captor occasionally tossed in, often spoiled, always sparse. The air was thick, stale. Every breath felt like it weighed something. The children, Maya and Caleb, had grown up in the dark, their childhoods lost in silence. No toys, no sunlight, no fresh air. They didn't know what trees looked like. They didn't know what their faces looked like in a mirror. Denise tried to make it bearable. She told stories, sang lullabies she could barely finish without choking on tears. Michael paced every day, counting steps to keep his sanity. But time blurred. Some weeks no food came. Other days their captor would appear silently, eyes watching through a sliver in the wall, never speaking, just staring. They weren't just trapped physically. They were erased from the world. Forgotten. Every creak of the house above made them freeze. Every passing footstep gave them hope, only to leave them in deeper despair. But what haunted them most wasn't the hunger, it wasn't the dark. It was the idea that no one was coming. They had been buried alive, and the world had moved on, and yet, somehow, they survived. Every breath was a victory, every whispered prayer, a defiant act against the person who believed they could disappear without a trace. When the door finally opened, when light finally broke through the suffocating dark, it was like waking from a nightmare too long lived. The children screamed at first, not knowing if it was another trick. Denise collapsed in tears. Michael stood frozen, shielding them one last time. After 9 years of being treated like shadows, they were human again. When emergency responders arrived at the house, it wasn't just another call, it was a miracle. Officers entered cautiously, their flashlights slicing through the musty air of the hidden room. And there, huddled together in the shadows, was the Johnson family. Rescue workers moved gently, blankets were wrapped around trembling shoulders, oxygen masks were offered, paramedics whispered kind words as they examined thin arms, sunken cheeks and distant, hollow eyes. Denise wept openly. Michael barely spoke. The children clung to their mother, shielding their faces from the sudden brightness of the outside world. It was the first time they had seen sunlight in nearly a decade. They were immediately taken into protective custody, escorted to a safe facility where they could rest, eat, and begin the long process of healing. Doctors were stunned by their condition, malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, psychological trauma, and yet somehow their spirits were unbroken. Word of their rescue spread like wildfire. News vans lined the street. Reporters scrambled for answers. The story of the vanished family found beneath their own home became a national headline overnight. People across the country were shocked, outraged. How could this happen? How had everyone missed it? But the biggest question still loomed. Who did this? Investigators quickly reopened the case. They re-examined the home's ownership history and security footage from years prior. Then a familiar name resurfaced. Someone who had been close to the family before the disappearance. A handyman, a trusted neighbor. A man who had even helped police search the property back in 1985. He had moved out of state years ago, living quietly, working under a new name. The discovery of architectural blueprints hidden in the attic sealed it. They showed a hand-drawn layout of the house with a secret chamber carefully designed into the foundation. His fingerprints were found on several items in the hidden room. He had built the prison, he had kept them there. And for 9 years he had walked free, blending into society while the Johnsons suffered in silence. The arrest was swift, the charges were severe: unlawful imprisonment, child endangerment, assault, psychological abuse, and more. During the trial, the courtroom sat frozen as the details of the family's torment were read aloud. The man showed no remorse, but the Johnsons, despite their pain, stood tall. They gave testimony. They faced him. And in doing so, they reclaimed the power he had tried to steal. Their rescue was not just a recovery. It was a resurrection. Diane gasped. And